Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. On this special Canada Day episode, meet Edmonton-based entrepreneur and sustainable brand maven, Carly Gramlich. Carly talks about her leap of faith to pursue a passion and develop sustainable luxury fashion and accessories for the modern professional and her brand and online retail store, Upper District. Carly also shares with us how her personal journey has built resilience and fortitude to take Upper District to the next level on the global stage.
And again, the sustainability of sustainability is just constantly being authentic and honest. And I mean, people can sniff out greenwashing from a mile away for the most part. So it's ways that we can really emphasize.
Companies are getting pretty good at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it is, ways that we can emphasize those commitments. And that's where groups, for example, like Positive Luxury come in. And
third party validation, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And with that biodiversity strategy, because ultimately we're building it out right now. So it's going to be a public document as well.
Let's listen in now. Carly, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me on.
Well, you and I met earlier in the spring in Las Vegas at Shop Talk at a gathering, and boy, we had a great conversation. And so it's great to follow up with you. Where am I finding you? That was in Vegas. Where am I finding you today?
I am just back home in Edmonton.
Fantastic. And how are things in Edmonton?
Oh, they're good. Summer's around the corner, and I'm actually going to be taking like a little bit of time off. So I'm looking forward to that.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. Well, as I mentioned, you and I got to know each other a little bit and we've chatted, but the folks listening don't really know who you are. So let's start there. Tell us about who you are and what you do and what's your personal professional journey. And then we'll get all about what you're doing with interesting brands and retail and all that stuff.
Sure. Well, I founded Upper District in 2017. My personal background is a little bit unconventional. So I actually consider myself to be unapologetically unconventional is how I best state it. So I come from a pretty humble background. I actually grew up as a farmer's daughter in just rural Alberta. And we didn't grow up with much. I was raised by a single dad. My mom left when I was about 2. And so it was an interesting upbringing, but honestly, I wouldn't change it for the world. A few years later, we actually had a nanny come from the Philippines and she came to help out. Ultimately ended up being my stepmom. And, but yeah, our upbringing was challenging in the sense that we didn't have a lot of money. But, we grew up to be very independent, resourceful, and tough, to say the least. So that's kind of where the personal background comes from. Professionally, I went to there was about 500 people in our village, we'll say. Small class, graduated high school there. Again, a world away from what I do now. The world of luxury obviously wasn't on my radar at that time. It was always something I was so intrigued by, but just was never a potential reality, especially when you're an 18-year-old kind of looking down the tunnel of life and deciding what you might want to do. So when I was younger, I went to university, started doing my, prerequisites for dental school, actually. Completed those. I was doing a specialized science degree, wrote my DAT, which is the Canadian version of the dental aptitude test, and my marks weren't high enough, so I ultimately didn't get into dental school. So from there, it was kind of, dream crushing at that age, and I ultimately pursued dental hygiene. So worked as a dental hygienist, or graduated as a dental hygienist in 2014, and then did that until there was kind of one of those moments in life where you really sit back and think about what truly makes you happy. And in my case, it kind of came in the form of a late-term pregnancy loss and, having to undergo surgery on, a Friday and having to be back to work on Monday. So decided to pursue a passion and just kind of go all in. And that's when Upper District was born.
Well, it's not unusual for me to hear from folks, entrepreneurs, this intersection of the personal and the professional. So which you're kind of articulating.
Yes.
Question for you, Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books talked about adversity and its benefits, basically. Yes. In other words, growing up with no adversity isn't so great. Growing up with too much adversity is hard to overcome. It sounds like you had, I don't know if it's the right way to say, but it's forged you in terms of fortitude and because you got to have a lot of fortitude to do what you do today, to do what you did before too, but to do what you do today, and we'll get into that. You got a lot of hills to climb and bumps to overcome, right?
Yeah, it was ultimately starting from scratch. Like there was no financial backing, there was no wealth, there was no network connections, absolutely nothing. So when I built it, it was literally right from scratch. So it's been a slower process, but a very organic process, a very sustainable growth. And I think there's so much value in that because we move quickly and I make decisions quickly, but I think I just bring a totally different perspective in how I make decisions. And, it's been crucial to the business growth
and probably how you take on the day-to-day bumps in the road, right?
Absolutely.
We were talking off mic. I was trying to get something done and there's just endless little bumps in the road, and you're like, fine. You just push through, right? I mean,
you just roll with them, and
yeah.
I think I never stress too much about things that are out of my control. If it's something I can't control, then you just kind of go with the flow and deal with it. But
that's a good life lesson for everybody for sure. Now. Talk about, so I get the dental school and the kind of the left turn, but why the left turn? And well, let's before we get ahead of ourselves, tell us about Upper District. Before we ask you why you got into it, tell us all about Upper District and what it is and all about it.
Yeah, so we're a Canadian-based sustainable luxury fashion and accessories brand. So we've currently launched our eyewear, and we're actually building out our digitally powered circular model apparel expansion. So this is with the ability for resale, guaranteeing authenticity and tracking impact. So our expansion involves a strong tech element to it as well. But ultimately, we are brand first, and we've got strong Canadian roots.
Your concept is an interesting intersection of a bunch of things, like right, which I'm sure is fun because it makes it a little hard to define sometimes, but also interesting, right? Because you got to be different. So you've got this intersection of, as you say, circular economy, sustainability, but luxury at the same time. And then you're building things out, and then there's technology. So just unpack it a little bit more for us. So if I go to your site today, I see eyewear, for example, right? Tell me about the product and tell me why you started there, and let's start there.
So we started with eyewear ultimately because, first off, it was something that I could help co-design. I had sketches, I had sent them back and forth to our manufacturer, and that's kind of where we went with that. But also, it all kind of relates back to my story again, in the sense that, you put on eyewear and it can really evoke a sense of confidence and almost protection. It's almost a piece that you wear that enables you to really take on a new challenge and feel that sense of protection. And that really resonated with me.
I hadn't thought of eyewear that way. I remember I got a fancier pair of glasses, and it really was a distinctive change, right? Versus the kind of generic, like people, I don't know, I wouldn't say look at you differently. I mean, literally wow, look at those glasses. They're different. They're interesting. But it also is should I call it a statement piece? But it works both ways, yeah?
Yeah. You can be very versatile with it. And I think it's that versatility and style too that, again, just allows for, freedom of self-expression for one. But I mean, you can wear a different piece every day if you really want. And it's so versatile.
And tell me about how would you describe for those, since we're an audio media, how would you describe the glass? Like what aesthetic, where did you borrow from? I mean, you said you did the designs. Where did where did that come from?
We kind of relate best to, like I like to say, the modern professional. So very strong styles, kind of those cool styles that, again, just they evoke a sense of strength and
They're very and of course I'll put a link into the show notes, but they're very distinctive, right? You can't miss it. Like they're not, I wouldn't call them subtle.
No, they're very edgy.
Yeah.
Just kind of like hyper cool designs.
Yeah. Now, who did you have in mind when you had that in your designer's eye mind, so to speak? Who was wearing those? Did you think, like, is it for everyone, every age? And just tell me a little bit about the personality you think would be interested in your product. And then I want to talk about the sustainability element, which is really cool. But I'm just kind of hovering on the product first.
Again, those modern professionals, so kind of 25 to 35, who are really stepping out and kind of building up or climbing the ladder, whether it be, through their own entrepreneurial goals or the corporate ladder, or just really taking hold of what they want to create or where they want to be. That's the best way I can, describe our consumers or who are wearing our products.
Yeah, who you're thinking of when you're designing them and
exactly
making them. Now, let's talk about the sustainability piece. So, how did you come to that? It's an interesting, another interesting intersection, because I do find that folks who grow up rural and on the farm are closer to the earth. I mean, they have a very, I would say, greater appreciation. Does that resonate with you? Is that how you got there? Or
That's where it all came from. Yeah. Like I said, we were just small grain farmers. So ultimately it was that agricultural process that kept food on our table. And even today, it's my favorite place in the world to go. My parents still live there, and it's it's just a place you can go for one to find solitude. So I think there was always that strong connection. And I always say, like, when I founded the brand in 2017, we were really the new kids on the block in terms of sustainability. As even in the past couple of years, there's been this monumental shift toward more focus. But ultimately, at that time, it was still so new. So it's always been, kind of a key value that's been incorporated into our brand right from the beginning.
And your DNA. I mean, it's right into your DNA, isn't it?
Exactly. Right? Mine personally and the brand itself. So we've always been very authentic about it too, right from the beginning. Especially now we're noticing with the rise in greenwashing, how do we emphasize that and communicate that to our consumers? So, I wrote a piece for a publication. Oh gosh, this was prior to COVID. This was a while back, that really highlighted, the sustainability challenge faced by small emerging brands, and which highlighted things that brands with small budgets can do to communicate and emphasize their sustainability commitments in ways that do have a big impact. Because that's the next challenge, small brands, small budget, but it's a big undertaking ultimately. So, for us, our first, way of emphasizing that was that we developed our corporate biodiversity strategy. So it kind of highlights our commitment, ways that we stem biodiversity loss, highlights our driving motivators. We set our scope, our guiding framework, really recognize our impacts and dependencies, kind of ways that we implement our actions and, in terms of what we're going to do, and then our monitoring strategy. So one thing with our biodiversity strategy is it's actually, we call it a living document, because as we grow as a brand and as a business, so does the document. We can kind of look back on it as a whole and make changes. So different ways of, implementing our actions, for example, is, things that we can avoid or minimize or restore, and things that we can't. How do we offset those? So that was kind of our first step in our sustainability journey, I guess you'd say. And then from there, actually, I'd say fairly recently, we were selected by Positive Luxury, which is an ESG Plus certifying group, as part of their inaugural accelerator program. So we're working with them towards the Butterfly Mark certification. And just to give you a sense, they only certify luxury brands. So for example, Dior is certified by Positive Luxury. So we were very, very fortunate to be taken up by them as well.
Yeah, that's a good neighborhood to be in. That's a good neighbor to have,
absolutely, for sure. To build that into our brand as well. And that's something that we can easily communicate with our consumers through all of our retail platforms and partners. As a mark, you can use it on your packaging, through your marketing efforts, pretty well everywhere. So that's
it's interesting. So when you just touched on it, how do you go to market? I see, on your site you're selling direct to consumer. Is there a wholesale component or or just a direct to consumer component? How does that work?
So yeah, exactly. So we're primarily actually through physical high-end retailers, and then we do a small portion through our D2C channel. And for the reason for that is because as a luxury brand, and this was what really resonated with me as I was entering the world of luxury, is seeing that customer experience. Like, what makes luxury, appealing to me as someone coming in from the outside? And ultimately, it was that experience. So that's always been key within our process. And we thought that the best way to do that was to partner with these physical retailers where we can actually incorporate a really defined and, impressive customer experience, which is pretty challenging to do through a D2C channel, especially again as a newer brand with limited budgeting. To try and build that through the digital journey can be challenging. And, the cost to develop the tech for that type of thing and, the different experiences.
The platforms aren't giving you any big discounts sure either, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And everyone's vying for the same thing too. So that's why we're primarily physical retail. So we always offer our retail partners kind of first dibs at our collection drops. And then we'll put out little teasers or little, limited release collections through our D2C channels. But primarily right now we go to market through physical high-end retailers.
A little bit of 1 + 1 = 3, right? A little bit of direct and then working carefully with the wholesale partners. All right. So let's talk about sustainability a little bit. I was writing the questions and, sustainability is obviously very important. Talk about the sustainability of sustainability. I've been thinking about this a lot. I interviewed Seth Godin. He's got a new book out called The Carbon Project. And, it's really hammering home the need to do all the things that you're describing. And it's always, to me, there's always, and this is not new, there's always been a contradiction between what people say and what they do. That gap, I think, is narrowing a bit, but then other things show me that it's not. So how are you like when you talk to your wholesale partners and when you talk to consumers, do you think this is finally we've hit some kind of tipping point, back to Malcolm Gladwell, that sustainability is going to matter and more purchase decisions?
I think so. Like, for example, the research that we've done has shown that, 2.5 times the consumers who actually plan to shift their spend to sustainable brands. And then also 138% increase in sustainable fashion consumer buying intentions over the next 5 years. So it really is on the forefront of, people's minds. And in our case, we feel that, especially with our expansion that's coming out, consumers are actually looking more so at our pieces as an investment. So which is
sustainable in and of itself, right? Instead, exactly. I'm not going to buy 5 of these. I'm going to buy, for $1. I'm going to pay one, not for $1, but easy math because I'm not good at math. But I'm going to buy one for $5.
Yes, right? Exactly. So, and again, the sustainability of sustainability is just constantly being authentic and honest. And I mean, people can sniff out greenwashing from a mile away for the most part. So it's ways that we can really
companies are getting pretty good at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it is, ways that we can emphasize those commitments. And that's where groups, for example, like Positive Luxury come in. And
third party validation, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And with that biodiversity strategy, because ultimately we're building it out right now. So it's going to be a public document as well. So it'll be a link on, our site. It'll be available where consumers can actually go through. They can read through. They can look at our conservation hierarchy. They can look through our, the dependencies, our dependency pathways, and really make an informed decision ultimately.
And hold you accountable too, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So as I said off the top of the podcast, you and I met in a networking event in Shop Talk in Las Vegas. So I wanted to circle. You're my Canada Day release podcast, July 1st, Canada Day. So it's great to have a Canadian entrepreneur on, almost like I planned it. But almost. Let's talk about the let's call it the fundraising or the opportunity in Canada versus the U.S. versus international. Because you were sharing, you do a lot of work in the U.S. from that perspective, and even internationally. So talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, so the environment for Canadian brands, it's honestly challenging. So we're not typically perceived kind of at the forefront of fashion, but at the same time, I believe there's a lot of untapped potential and talent. So this, though, for that reason, that's kind of why we hit the ground running immediately internationally as well. So we've kind of built out in Canada and the US, for example, pretty well in tandem. So in terms of funding, also, I mean, you talk to any entrepreneur, it's incredibly challenging, the time, the mental toll that it takes, the constant rejection. It's
part of the gig, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the gig.
So
that resilience.
Yeah, exactly. But even in our case, despite having a strong tech element, many investors don't want to invest in a brand. They're tech first or fashion tech or luxe tech. They don't so much want the brand, but ultimately our focus is brand first. And then obviously we're seeing large investments and, kind of the buzzword tech market, I'll call it. But, sometimes it just takes the right investor to see the medium and long term. And needless to say, we've always sought out investors who we felt would be hands-on and kind of experienced in our market and ultimately willing to step into the trenches with us.
Interesting.
But with that being said, we haven't formally fundraised. We've been in contact with a few angel investors, but one of the challenges of funding too also goes back to the fact that upon starting the brand, I had absolutely no network. So even gaining access, to get in front of the right investor was challenging, and time consuming. But, as I shared with you at Shop Talk, I'm a member of the Deal Makers, which is, we're based in New York City, and we're all female founders, CEOs, investors. And it's been, access to groups like that who has facilitated those introductions and ultimately, starting to make that fundraising process a little bit more feasible and a little bit more of a reality.
Also plow the road a little bit for you, so to speak. Right?
Exactly.
Both in people, but also in process, right? Like,
exactly.
We're not inherently born with understanding of how to do private equity raises or family raises. Like, right? It's not a textbook to read on that stuff, really, right? So
yeah. So, I mean, that's been huge for us as a business and me personally too. So that's where a lot of, going back to the opportunities within the US market has come from as well. So like I said, we've kind of grown in tandem in Canada and the US, and through the Deal Makers, they've actually been crucial in facilitating our growth in the US as well. So for example, the ex-CEO of Neiman Marcus Group is also in there, and she had made the introduction for us at Neiman Marcus. The head of Tmall Luxury Pavilion
was that Karen Katz?
Yes, it is.
And Karen's got a new job too. Did you see?
Yes, I did see that. Yeah. So
Karen's
she's it's fantastic. Honestly, women like that who are, willing to make that introduction for a younger female entrepreneur. It's like
send the elevator. What did Scott Galloway? How does he describe it? Send the elevator back down, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, that's one thing I keep in mind throughout this whole process too. If there's any way that I can help or, repay that favor, repay that debt, I'm willing to by any means necessary. So we're starting to see, kind of more opportunities grow that way. And that's where some of our international opportunities have come from as well. We're a group that do have an international reach, and, some of them are newer like me, and others have been in the industry for decades. So yeah, it's
they're looking. It's interesting because you feed off each other in that you need and benefit from their experience, and they benefit from your enthusiasm and new ideas, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Quite often, they love speaking with young entrepreneurs and really just passionate entrepreneurs. Really. Yep.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so you've hinted at it a couple of times. Let's get into talking about what's next beyond eyewear. What's your roadmap look like, and what does the future hold for your business?
Yeah, so we are building out our apparel expansion. So that comes with the tech element. As I'd mentioned before, our pieces are actually developed with the ability for resale right from initial purchase point. So it's kind of
hold on. How does that work? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's actually built on blockchain. Through each piece kind of has a digital ID. And then through that digital ID, there's the ability for impact tracking. So as it moves through, say consumer 1, 2, 3, 4, you can actually see the entire impact. And this again relates back to the sustainability side of things, but you can see, the impact from the initial manufacturing, milling, transport to initial purchase point, and then from consumer 1 to consumer 2, you can see the impact, CO2 emissions, water usage, different things like that for obviously the transport, the cleaning, any relisting services. And then ultimately, as it's moved through, we'll say it's reached the end of its life cycle, we'll actually take it back for textile recycling. So say consumer 4 is looking back at the entire impact of the product and kind of deciding, is this piece worth, trying to move forward again, or does it just make more sense to send it back for textile recycling or recycling? Because we're also going to be hopefully implementing it into the eyewear as well. Then it kind of gives informed decision, informed ultimately an informed decision about where they want it to go next. And we'll offer a small buyback credit too, to make sure that it ends up back in our hands, just as an incentive so that it doesn't end up in the landfill.
Wow. That's interesting. Super interesting.
Yeah. So that's where we're going in terms of the expansion, the apparel expansion, but also just further international expansion into new markets. So we're also in talks with Chalhoub Group right now in the Middle East. So we'll know a little bit more maybe in the next, summer's coming up. So I'd say probably September. With everybody taking off on holidays. And then, we're also looking at expansion into China probably in the next 3 to 5 years, but that's a whole new can of worms as well. So just moving, but
particularly now.
Yeah, exactly. But still just taking it slow and that type of thing. And then we're also looking at beginning a formal fundraise. We've got some traction under our belt now that investors can see. We've been around for, we're coming up on 5.5 years. So we feel like now we're kind of in the sweet spot. Any, feedback that I've gotten is kind of, we're in the sweet spot for investors. We're not too early stage, but we're not too late stage. This is kind of this is the time to act. So that's what we're looking at in terms of fundraising. And then, just keeping this ball rolling, keeping the momentum going.
I was going to say, it's the Goldilocks moment, right? You're not too old, not too young, Interesting.
This is the time to act. Yeah, absolutely.
Super interesting. All right. Well, if folks want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about the business, I'll put in the links to the URL. Are you a LinkedIn person? Are you a connector via that way? That's the best way to get a hold of you?
I'm really active on LinkedIn. So honestly, the best way to get a hold of me directly is to reach out on LinkedIn. If you're looking for, or if they're looking for any, business inquiries or questions, they can email inquiries@upper-district.com. But the best way to get in touch with me directly is definitely through LinkedIn.
All right, and I'll put that. I'll throw that in the show notes as well. So we'll make sure everybody can connect. Well, listen, Carly, it's been a real treat talking to you. I mean, it's not our first time speaking, but we kind of got to dive into some interesting stuff about how you think about business and your business model. And listen, I wish you continued success. It's a fascinating journey.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you for having us. And honestly, just thank you for giving small brands a voice and a platform to share it.
Yeah, certainly my pleasure. And I wish you continued success. And thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.